Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Fair Exposed. My name is Robert Jerome Pagan, and I am your host, ex-Fair entertainment director and theatrical director, and Fair actor for over a decade. And in this series, we are breaking down Renaissance Fair from its micro point to its macro point. And so today's episode, we are talking about the differences of which types of Renaissance fairs are out there. That's right. There are multiple types of Renaissance fairs, everything from fantasy fairs, historically accurate fairs, pirate fairs, and time travel fairs. And so we're going to talk about each one of those fairs and how they're different and how they kind of represent a different part of subcultures in each aspect of the fair community. So don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe, and join me as we go deep into fair on Fair Exposed. I'll see you in a few. So let's start with where everything originated, the historically accurate Renaissance Fair. Now, when I say historically accurate, there was never, ever, ever such thing as a truly historically accurate Renaissance Fair. But the original Renaissance Fair, the one that was started in Agora, the one that was started down in Southern California, was started with the idea of recreating a Renaissance Fair village as historically accurate as possible for educational purposes for children. And that is where Renaissance Fair started. And so the historical accurate fair focuses more on the idea of costuming that is historically accurate, stage shows that talk about the history, the drama within the history. You have a lot more Shakespearean references. You have characters who were alive in history. These fairs tend to be usually ran by people from the older generation of Renaissance fairs. Now, when you look at California or you look at fairs around the nation, major fairs tend to have a little bit of this at the heart, but they go a little bit opposite. But when you look at California, Southern California has a very different style fair than Northern California. Northern California fancies its fair more as a historical accurate fair. And so when you go there, you see that the energy is put into costuming, and it is put into the ways people speak, and it's put into who is at the fair. That is what a historically accurate Renaissance Fair represents. You still get turkey legs, you still get booze, you still get mead, you still get all the jousting and all the amazing things that come with the idea of a Renaissance Fair. But the heart of what the mission is, the vision of the Renaissance Fair, is to be historically accurate as possible. Fantasy fairs. Now, fantasy fairs are an interesting amalgam. So when I tell you that the original Renaissance Fair started and it was all about education, yes, that's true for the first couple of years. However, when you get a bunch of actors together and you get a bunch of hippies and you get a bunch of artisans together, you tend to understand that things are going to go a little bit more Woodstocky. And so as that was being seen, capitalism happened. And it's almost like hippies hit capitalism and they realized, wow, what people want to come to pay a ticket to walk through the door to see is a little bit of that magic. What if we have Queen Elizabeth, but we also have Merlin? What if we have Queen Elizabeth and we have a dark empress who is now taking over our village? These fairs inspire imagination. These fairs inspire more a playful spirit. They also tend to have a little bit more fun, and they tend to be a place where a wider range of people are accepted. So many of you saw my video earlier about Renaissance fairs and racism and the fantasy of it and not. And when you look at the fairs, fantasy fairs tend to be a lot more diverse. And that is because as we are growing as a fantasy nerd culture, we're realizing there's room for black elves and black dwarves and Latino elves. And that, the wizards in Harry Potter also had a school in Latin America and all these different places. And so those fairs tend to be open to a little bit more diversity. They also tend to be open into costumes. So you'll see people walking around as dragons, as centaurs, as orcs, and everything under the sun that falls under that Renaissance fantasy category. Renaissance fantasy fairs are amazing to go to, and they're a lot of fun. Southern California leans more towards that Renaissance fantasy pleasure fair, whereas Northern leans more towards that historical fair. New type of fair that really started coming around in the early thousands and has really boomed is the time traveler fair. That's right. With shows like Viking and shows like Lord of the Rings and Ragnarok and Rain and all these, and Game of Thrones, all these different shows, you realize they're not all set in the same time period. So when you say Renaissance, you're not even in the same time period of Renaissance. And we're going to talk about the different Renaissance period Renaissance fairs in a second. But time traveler fairs, they incorporate all the early decades, medieval decades, Egyptian, Vikings, and you're going to see Doctor Who walking around. You're going to see cyberpunk. You're going to see more steampunk. They are a lot more a mix of Renaissance fair meets fantasy fair meets cosplay. And a lot of the fairs are leaning more, the newer fairs are leaning more towards that direction. Las Vegas, Age of Chivalry, is a great Renaissance fair, which you walk through and you 1 minute you're in pirates, and the next minute you're with Vikings, and the next minute you're with early kings, and then you're over here with witches, and it's amazing. It's really cool to see. And then you see the awesomeness of the customers getting involved, because these fairs also bring out a lot of cosplayers. Because what's better for an Instagram picture than a village full of people who look like you? Like, everyone's dressed up in some amazing costumes, having a blast. So yes, that is one of the new parts of fair, and that is what a time traveler fair is. Don't worry, those of you who thought I forgot about the type of fair called Pirate Fair. We're gonna do a whole episode alone on Pirate Fair. Now, earlier I did mention that there are multiple different types of Renaissance period fairs, and that is very true. In California alone, we have king fairs versus queen fairs, Italian fairs versus French fairs. Yeah. And all those fairs are set during different time periods, which means different costuming, which means different vending, which means different booths, which means different participants. There's very few people who do all style of fairs. I've done them all. I worked them all. I ran them all. And I will say that one of the interesting things about looking at different time periods when you're looking inside a historically accurate Renaissance fair in different time periods is really how different not only time is, but countries are based on costuming, based on food, based on literature, based on what was being performed on stage. As a theatrical director, I adapted a lot of early Renaissance theater, both Italian, English, and also how each one of these groups, although they were in a different time, separated by hundreds of years, they all were inspired by the ideology of Rome and Greece. And it's funny because in 2024, the Roman Empire complex was a big thing. And just recently, I have seen advertisements for a new Rome fair happening in the Central Valley of California. And I'm very interested to see what that is going to look like. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Fair Exposed. Like I said, some of these episodes are going to be light and fun because Renaissance Fair isn't all about darkness and drama. A lot of it is about having fun and meeting new people and exploring experiences you never thought you would have. So, if you have a chance, go out, experience every single one of these type of fairs. Find your favorite, but remember, each one has its own value. Thank you again, and like, follow, and subscribe, because we're going to have so many more episodes inside this series as you, viewers, are reaching out to me with your experiences at Fair, and I can't wait to talk to you and get you on Fair Exposed as well. So if you want to be on our show, don't forget to reach out and say hello to me. And the Las Vegas Fair is happening in the beginning of October. I'm going to be there. So if you see me, say hi. Have a great one. Again, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. And if you like my stories, go check out my book series, Pagan Scary Stories, all fictional stories written by myself for our listeners.